You know how when you're sick, you think you're the only person in the entire world that is suffering from the ailment you have? Well, I know now I'm not, because I went to a new surgeon and he had 50 clients in his office.
He was born Marvin Aday, but before he could even crawl, the world labeled him Meat, a nickname that clung like a scar and somehow followed him into rock legend status, surviving a stage collapse, a voice lost to trauma, and even a knife-wielding father hell-bent on vengeance. He once spent a decade as a vegetarian, which made things awkward when one legendary female pop star refused to even meet him, simply because of his name. Can you guess which pop star it was in the comments? We'll reveal who it was later in the video. Stay tuned for the truth behind the on-stage collapse that nearly killed him, and the wild motorcycle anthem that he delivered without ever writing one. But to truly understand how this larger-than-life icon became both myth and man, we need to go back to where it all began, because his early years hold pivotal moments you'll never believe. Early life. Dallas, Texas, 1947, a time of jukeboxes, soda fountains, and post-war optimism. But for little Marvin Lee Aday, the world was already throwing curveballs. His father, Orvis, a war-scarred alcoholic with a violent streak, took one look at his 9-pound, red-faced newborn and joked he looked like a slab of meat. Nurses labeled the crib Meat, and the name stuck, only to evolve years later when a football coach, cursing a cleat to the foot, shouted, "Get off me, you hunk of meatloaf!" By the time Marvin hit 7th grade, he weighed 240 pounds and stood 5 feet 2 inches. He wasn't just bullied by classmates. Some neighborhood parents forbade their kids from playing with the fat kid. One local Levi's ad even mocked him by name. "Poor fat Marvin can't wear Levi's." The isolation was crushing, but in that vacuum, Marvin's imagination took root. He started dreaming, storytelling, performing, and escaping into roles where no one mocked him, only applauded. Yet home offered no refuge. His beloved mother, Wilma, a school teacher and gospel singer, was his moral compass, his lifeline. But his father's alcoholism grew darker after her cancer diagnosis. When she died in 1966, Marvin broke. At the funeral, he tried to lift her from the coffin, screaming in denial. Days later, in a drunken fury, Orvis accused Marvin of stealing inheritance money and lunged at him with a butcher knife. Marvin fought back, broke his father's nose, and fled the house barefoot into the Dallas night, never looking back. Within weeks, he took what little money he had, boarded a plane to Los Angeles, and began rebuilding from ashes. Nonetheless, the pain he carried and the dreams he clung to would soon explode into one of rock music's most theatrical rises. Career and success. When Meat Loaf arrived in Los Angeles in the late 1960s, he wasn't chasing fame, he was fleeing chaos. But his early wounds, shame, grief, survival, fueled a performance style that couldn't be faked. He joined experimental theater, formed a band, and landed roles in Hair and eventually The Rocky Horror Show, where he famously bolted from rehearsal after seeing Tim Curry in drag, thinking he might be asked to wear fishnets. He returned the next day, sheepish and chuckling, a comedic crack in his otherwise operatic arc. But the turning point came in 1973 when he met composer Jim Steinman. Together they became a creative volcano. Steinman's fever dream songs and Meat's wounded soul delivery were lightning in a bottle. After years of rejections, they recorded Bat Out of Hell in 1977. Critics mocked it as overblown kitsch. Audiences? They couldn't get enough. The album eventually sold over 40 million copies, yet triumph brought trouble. By 1979, Meat had pushed himself so hard on tour he literally lost his voice, opening his mouth in rehearsal and letting out a strangled "Aah!" With no damage visible, doctors chalked it up to exhaustion and anxiety, emotional echoes of his early traumas. Steinman was forced to release their next album without him. Meat spiraled, lawsuits piled up, he declared bankruptcy, his marriage nearly collapsed. For a moment, the man who'd sung of bat-winged escape was grounded, broken, and voiceless. But in 1993, he roared back. Bat Out of Hell 2 revived his career with the Grammy-winning I'd Do Anything for Love, reminding the world and himself that resurrection was part of the brand. Still, the grandiosity of Meat Loaf's stage presence masked a personal life full of quirks, contradictions, and obsessive discipline, truths that only get more fascinating once the curtain falls. Meatless Loaf? The vegetarian years. Yes, Meat Loaf, he of thunderous vocals and artery-clogging metaphors, once spent a solid decade as a vegetarian. In the 1980s, amid health concerns and a desire to respect animals, he gave up meat entirely. The irony wasn't lost on him, and it led to some hilarious situations. Take the time he was seated near K.D. Lang at an awards show and wanted to meet her. Word was sent to her table, but she refused, saying she wouldn't associate with someone named Meat Loaf. What she didn't know, he hadn't touched a steak in years. Meat was both amused and irritated. "I stopped being a K.D. Lang fan after that," he quipped, his usual mix of grudge and grin. And of course, that's the answer to the question I popped at the start of the video. But don't think the strangeness is over yet. Fantasy football and gummy bears. Behind the scenes, Meat Loaf wasn't a debauched rocker lounging in limos. He was a stats-obsessed fantasy sports nerd with a vicious sweet tooth. In the 2010s, he played in over a dozen fantasy football leagues at once and won most of them. He'd researched draft strategies on his tour bus, staying up past midnight tinkering with lineups. Gummy bears, Tim Tams, and peanut butter cake fueled these sessions. "If I can't give it 110%, I'm not doing it," he said, a mantra that applied equally to screaming through an 8-minute power ballad and dominating a pretend sports league. Hotel gyms and oxygen masks. For someone mocked for his size his whole life, Meat Loaf was surprisingly fit, especially later in life. He'd hit hotel gyms for 2.5 hours, outlasting younger, leaner crew members. He wasn't trying to look good, he was trying to last. The man who collapsed on stage more than once knew his body was fragile, so he treated it like a machine, pushing until it could handle just one more encore. After shows, he'd grab an oxygen mask, towel off, and quietly return for the next encore like nothing happened. Closet recording and couch collecting. For the 2011 album Hell in a Handbasket, he often recorded vocals in closets and hotel rooms using a mobile mic rig. He valued emotional truth over acoustics. If he was feeling it in a motel bathroom, that's where the take happened. And when he wasn't behind a mic, he was haunting antique shops. Meat Loaf collected shawls, ornate furniture, and oddball trinkets from around the world. One of his favorite pieces? A 19th century fainting couch, used, he joked, to collapse on after collapsing on stage. A gentle giant in leather. The public saw a leather-clad berserker howling about dashboard light lust. Privately, he was a soft-spoken, almost shy man who said "darlin' and sir" and gave bear hugs to strangers. But he did have a temper. On Celebrity Apprentice, he famously exploded at Gary Busey over misplaced glitter supplies, shouting, "I'm gonna kick your ass," before later admitting he was mortified.
"Part of that pain is mine. I'm sick and tired of you, mother." No.
That was all mine in my basket.
Mother.
Still, that flash of rage was rare. Most of the time, he was the guy cracking dad jokes and watching the Weather Channel to relax. He also had a serious philanthropic streak. He raised money for cancer charities, sang for sick kids, and supported the Painted Turtle Camp. And when a British couple chose his ballad, "Heaven Can Wait," for their wedding song, he surprised them by showing up and singing it live. No PR stunt, no cameras, just a man honoring the people who loved him. Yet for all his quirks, obsessions, and contradictions, the most fascinating parts of Meat Loaf's story were the people who shaped his soul and held him together when everything else was falling apart. Relationships and connections. If Jim Steinman was Meat Loaf's musical soulmate, then Wilma Aday, his mother, was the emotional bedrock that kept him standing long enough to meet Steinman in the first place. As mentioned earlier, her early death shattered him, and her absence haunted his every triumph. "I was always singing to her," he admitted. "Her spirit was in every note, every theatrical flourish." Then came Steinman, the mad genius composer whose bombastic lyrics needed a voice big enough to survive them. Meat Loaf was that voice. Their collaboration on Bat Out of Hell became legend, but behind the scenes their bond was messy, brotherly, and at times explosive. Legal battles raged around them, but Meat Loaf insisted, "I never sued Jim, and Jim never sued me." Their managers fought, but their hearts stayed loyal. When Steinman passed in 2021, Meat Loaf was devastated. He died just 9 months later, almost like the act couldn't go on without its director. His first marriage to Leslie Edmonds was full of wild detours. He once proposed by presenting her with a whole salmon, and lasted over 2 decades. They raised 2 daughters, Pearl and Amanda, and endured the chaos of fame, bankruptcy, and collapse together. Pearl would even join his band as a backup singer, one of many ways he tried to make up for the time he lost as a touring father. Later in life, his second wife, Deborah Gillespie, gave him something he never had before: quiet. Their relationship, far from the spotlight, was his emotional sanctuary until the end. Still, for all the love Meat Loaf gave and received, the demands of success often strained the very relationships he relied on most, and financially, the price he paid was steep. Income and net worth. At the time of his death in January 2022, Meat Loaf's net worth was estimated at $40 million. This fortune stemmed from his multifaceted career as a musician and actor. His debut solo album, Bat Out of Hell, 1977, remains one of the best-selling albums in history, with over 43 million copies sold worldwide. Despite declaring bankruptcy in 1983 due to financial mismanagement and legal disputes, Meat Loaf managed a significant comeback. His 1993 album, Bat Out of Hell 2, Back into Hell, featuring the Grammy-winning single, I'd Do Anything for Love, But I Won't Do That, revitalized his career and contributed substantially to his wealth. In addition to music, Meat Loaf appeared in over 100 films and television shows, including notable roles in The Rocky Horror Picture Show, 1975, and Fight Club, 1999, further bolstering his income. Yet while his financial resurgence was impressive, the true essence of Meat Loaf's life was reflected in the places he called home and the personal spaces he curated. Real estate. For Meat Loaf, real estate wasn't about flaunting wealth, it was about finding sanctuary. After decades of life on the road and the chaos of sudden fame, his homes were carefully chosen havens that reflected both his dramatic flair and his surprising domesticity. In the 1990s, he purchased a sprawling mansion in Calabasas, California, a quiet retreat far from Hollywood's chaos. The house featured a custom-built screening room where he'd record vocals in makeshift studio rigs, often in closets or behind blackout curtains, chasing emotional rawness over studio polish. The decor was classic Meat Loaf, Victorian antiques, sports memorabilia, and the occasional Gothic flair. Later, he and his second wife, Deborah, settled in Austin, Texas. This home was more than just bricks and mortar, it was peace. Set against wide Texas skies, it reflected the calmer, more introspective phase of his life. Here, he collected rare furniture, wrote, and focused on family. He also owned a home in Redding, Connecticut for a period, a wooded escape he often used to unwind between tours. Real estate marked different chapters in his journey. The Calabasas mansion was the triumphant return. Austin was the exhale. Each property wasn't just a location, it was a signal of who Meat Loaf was becoming at that moment in time. Yet for all his theatricality on stage, one of the greatest contradictions of Meat Loaf's lifestyle is revealed in what he chose to drive, and more curiously, what he didn't. Vehicles and cars. Meat Loaf's relationship with vehicles was as theatrical and ironic as everything else in his life. For starters, the man behind Bat Out of Hell, one of the most iconic motorcycle anthems ever recorded, didn't even like riding motorcycles. In fact, he was terrified of them. Still, he posed with them on countless album covers and posters, always straddling a Harley he had no intention of taking for a spin. He did own one, a Harley-Davidson Softail, but mostly just for show. Cars were more his speed. In his younger days, he had a Dodge Charger he once used to flee his father's drunken rampage, as mentioned earlier in his early life. Over the years, his garage rotated through practical SUVs and mid-tier luxury sedans, favoring comfort over flash. You wouldn't catch him in a Lamborghini. You might find him obsessively adjusting the driver's seat of a Lincoln until it felt just right. Private jets were part of the touring life, though Meat Loaf never loved flying. One memorable flight nearly ended in disaster when the jet's landing gear failed to extend. The plane circled the airport for over an hour before emergency crews guided it safely down. Meat didn't speak for the rest of the night. Yachts? Not his thing. He'd joked that boats were just floating anxiety traps. But helicopters, those were a different beast. While filming the Bat Out of Hell 2 video, a helicopter nearly crash-landed while attempting an aerial shot. He laughed it off at the time, but admitted years later he never fully relaxed around rotors again. Nonetheless, as Meat Loaf grew older and the engine slowed, what remained wasn't horsepower, it was heart and the ever-deepening legacy he left behind. Current lifestyle. Meat Loaf passed away in January 2022 at the age of 74, but in many ways he was already living his encore. In the final years of his life, he focused on peace, privacy, and people, especially his wife, Deborah, and his daughters. He made fewer public appearances, but stayed connected to fans through interviews, charity work, and the occasional surprise performance. Despite numerous health issues, including spinal surgery, asthma, and past stage collapses, he continued to insist he would perform again, even rehearsing behind closed doors with oxygen tanks by his side. Perhaps the most poignant full-circle moment came with the passing of Jim Steinman in 2021. Meat Loaf was shattered. Their bond had always defied categorization: musical, emotional, mythic. Just 9 months later, Meat followed him. For many fans, it felt like the final act of a rock opera decades in the making. He may be gone, but his voice and story are very much alive. What part of Meat Loaf's life surprised you the most? His fear of motorcycles, his vegetarian phase, or the glitter-fueled meltdown with Gary Busey? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and check out our other deep dives into music's most legendary lives.